Hello and welcome. And this is episode 9 of Vocation. I'm your host, Maddie. And once again, I'm very pleased to announce that I'm joined by the great Michael Tsarion. We're going to be discussing one of his articles today called Better Dead Than Real. Can you give us a quick synopsis first off, Michael, of what we might be coming across today in today's episode?
Well, yes, thank you, Matty, for that. It sort of carries on a little bit from some of the things we've done before. I had written on the subject of the Contrarium in an article, but I thought that rather than extend that article and make it really long and ponderous, to write maybe one or two other shorter ones. And that's what this kind of is. It we wanted to delve into it because you see, we're in danger right now of, well, I mean, it's just a personal opinion, but I think that because we've been for so many decades. It actually goes really back into the 1800s, this exposure to the East and to the Orient. A lot of poison has come into the West. A lot. Depends on how you look at it, right? It's not that some good hasn't come in. There are some things worthwhile. But on the whole, it's like a house that has never been cleaned. It's never been flushed out. The carpets, the dust. And so eventually you're going to get, mold, whether you realize it or not, and whether you even smell it or not. It's going to creep very gradually through the years. And it's the same thing with the West. So what's happened right now is that the West is basically soaking in falsity. And therefore, it's so wall to wall that almost the vast majority of, humanities teachers in the top colleges, they or their wives are Buddhists, for instance, right? Now, you think that that's not going to affect some of the Western disciplines that they're involved in? It does. It even affects things as deep as quantum science. Most of the other books that are written on quantum science by, say, New Age writers, I won't mention any names, right? But they themselves are also steeped in this Eastern mysticism. So now they think they have a virtue when they blend the two traditions. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's not a virtue. It's not a virtue when you arbitrarily take Western scholars, Western disciplines, just because you happen to see some, uh, you know, maybe lightweight parallels to something that's been said in the East, that you immediately jump and go, there you go. The East was either the origin of these ideas or, well, either way, look at that. We're on parallel with the East. The East deserves this, thunderous applause. No, it doesn't. And there's many, many reasons. And I try to always bring those reasons up in my work. But we're not touching on that now. We're just going to say that the West has been slowly inundated with this from the time of theosophy, from the time of spiritualism, and then, of course, massively, because that was dying away. But then came the whole New Age movement, which then resaturated and also shrunk wrapped a lot of the garbage from the East. At least before that, you had a sort of aristocratic interest, a little bit sharper interest, something a little bit more legitimate. But by the time the American New Age started up, it was all over. And we have talked before about how these Eastern pundits then, these Eastern demagogues and charlatans mobilized. They realized what had happened. Oh my God, the almighty dollar's here. So let's immediately do some window dressing. And so they picked the best that they could find, those who had a better accent, those they knew the women would go for. They did this. And so they picked some of these sort of more seductive Eastern mystics that they knew that when the West looks like it's going to turn to us more and want certain exposure, we've got our guys ready. And this is then what happened. And it's an old story. It's been going on for ages. But I'm just worried about the contamination. So that then when you present teachings like this one of the Contrarium or anything else that I do, I don't mix it up. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fall in and go, oh, and by the way, in some sacred scripture of the East, they say the same thing. See, I'm not going to build those bridges. They don't need to be built. There's nothing but that's just a ruse. And then a lot of poison comes in at night when you weren't looking. No, you don't need to do it. If you have a legitimate interest in going to the East, by all means, go and study it. And study it assiduously. And I recommend even names in that. Yeah. So I'm not against that. But you've got to watch this cheap cross-pollination, this Eckhart Tolle type of style. And so this article, amongst others, tries to pare that away and just deal with the simple metaphysics of it in a short, contemporary manner that it can be read by anyone and contemplated by anyone. So that's basically background. Oh yeah, and then one other thing could be said is not only with this Eastern jive, because we've been exposed to it on a pop level for so long, there's also this sort of a movement. It started sort of underground, but it's getting traction by the day. And it's called the non-dualism movement, or whatever they want to call it, right? It's based in the thought philosophy of non-dualism. And we've done a couple of programs on Enslaved, which people should watch because they go into great detail. We're not going to be able to do any justice to it here, and there's no need because it's all there. And this started, and it's obnoxious. It again is part and parcel of this infestation of rats, from the Orient and from the East, coming in when you weren't looking. And eventually, people like me would know, let's wait and see. Sit back, and keep your binoculars going, keep a storm watch going, because you're going to find this thing growing. Like a farmer who's suddenly found that there's a new bacteria amongst the sugar cane, or that there's a new locust or something, new hybrid is eating everything up, right? Oh dear, here we go. Well, this is another one. And it's entirely due to Eastern paths coming in and contaminating the mind of some very, very regressed people. And my worry is that it's going to be a very big problem in the future, because it's going to tie in, they're going to dovetail this new Christian, the interest in Christianity that was brokered by people like Charlie Kirk and Russell Brand. And by now you got Jordan Peterson and others will join. When that starts to wane and when people get very dissatisfied with it, as they will be, and also that can happen a lot faster than these way showers think, these leaders of it, they don't realize that anyone buying this might be very disenchanted within even a 2-year period. I'm worried about that time, because what do you have to refill that? You see? So at some point when this mass new Christianization starts to go, yeah, yawn, I tried that, it doesn't work. That's when things like this non-dualism movement start looking more attractive, because you say, well, I've tried that, right? I followed the herd and I tried that. It didn't work. Yeah, there's something really rad about this. And it only takes another Rhonda Byrne, another Russell Brand. You see, it needs a nice packaging. The people who've fronted it right now are just miserable types. But it only takes a rock star. It only takes somebody with a gift of the gab tomorrow to pop out of the blue, and suddenly they're fucking viral. And if it's bankrolled, it'll be the new thing. It'll be this non-dualism will be the new thing, and it'll dovetail very well with some New Age stuff. It'll get a very big backing from the New Age. It won't get any backing from Christians, and it won't get any backing from anyone who's done the homework I hope people will have done. They'll be on to it. But I'm afraid that still leaves a lot of other anarchic minds out there, these ayahuasca types, there's still, don't you worry, it'll have plenty of followers. And that's my worry of tomorrow, but it all originates with the East. So several of my articles try to delve into that and just make people a little bit wary. And if this is all new to somebody listening, we can link up to another article I've got called Stilling the Mind. Stilling the Mind deals directly with the Eastern threat, right? These other ones only touch on it a little bit, but Stilling the Mind is a harder knock at it, and so that might introduce people. If they find this a bit odd, they go, what's your problem? What's all this? If you're really interested to find out what it's all about, and because it might be new, it might be something you've never heard of before, then, and I'm not bashing all of the East. I'm not bashing martial arts and, some of the other things that come out of the East, not at all. But again, as I say, that article will help. I've got an article on mysticism. It's just called Mysticism, Truth or Falsity. It's all on the same website, michaeltsarion.com. And it'll explain everything in clear language. There'll be no doubt about what I'm about in that,
And just to set it up a little bit more for maybe people that are newer coming into this, I guess people have a spiritual sort of inclination or attitude or experiences that they've had previously in life, or it's sort of a fundamental part of being human in a way. And throughout the history of the West, I guess for the least the last 2,000 years, you've had Christendom. And then, of course, you have then the Enlightenment period taking off. a part of that is this rise of science. You have Nietzsche comes along, one of the great philosophers. He has that famous declaration of God is dead. The Western psyche then, I guess civilization, the collective mind, moves into this sort of atheistic type of thought. They go, no, it's all about science. It's all material. It's all machinery. It's all mechanistic. And it's about dominating nature and this kind of thing. This moves forward. We go through the world wars. Obviously, these are catastrophic events. They deeply affect the psyche of man. Then you have the age of sort of love in the 1960s, then that rises afterwards. This is where this new answer to this spiritualless world that the West had become, and this is where these new Eastern ideas come into. This is where you see the rise of the psychedelics then taking off as well too, and through into the 70s. Naturally, that's progressed towards our more modern era where science has taken off further, technology has become such a giant behemoth of the technological manipulation of the world around us, that people have continued to lose faith. We're seeing a resurgence of what's happened with the new atheist movement. So, like, again, one of the people at the forefront was this new atheist movement was the Richard Dawkins, the Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett types that took over. But they all sort of just petered off, they all just sort of died off of recent years, and there's been a vacuum left. As you were saying, we've then been witnessing this resurgence in sort of Christianity or maybe even Islam in certain parts of the West, sadly. Again, you mentioned Charlie Kirk and the likes of people sort of falling into these kind of lines of thought. Naturally, that's not really going to tether back into the mind. I think the West has moved on through that. Again, there might be an inclination to go back to it slightly, but as you mentioned, I don't think it's going to hold. And then that leaves the gap open once more for these Eastern philosophies, as you mentioned. I guess my question, maybe even just understanding a little bit about the difference of the Eastern philosophies, is it that I think what it does to people that, again, I've sort of experienced in my own life is they get an experience of the transcendent, of the sort of the spiritual realm, or maybe come into contact with the archetypes in a certain sense. And they go, oh, I never got this from my old sort of going to church or going to mass or whatever. And that's why they continue then to latch onto it, because they get that one short experience that you can have doing things like meditation, breathing exercise and whatnot. What are the other major traps of the East then? You're saying about non-duality. What really is non-duality for people? And I think one of the other major things that people come into when they look at Eastern philosophies is this concept of awakening. If you could maybe tee up what those are a little bit, and then we'll dive into the article about what dualism is and how that's fundamental to the Western sort of school of thought.
Yeah, well, I have no time for almost all of it. The Eastern traditions, there are some good ones there, but in general, it's a big farce, which was slowly concocted over many thousands of years. That's why it's difficult for us to even envision it. And most people's vision of the East is really rather laughably stupid, as tourist at best. And also, because a lot of this bankrolling went into creating this exotic image of these towel heads, these ganja wallers, and in movies, and there's this whole thing. A lot of energy's gone into it, and it works. It really does. It works on a kind of an anarchic Western mindset, and always, traditionally, down through the hundreds of years, it would have always been more interesting to those who knew nothing about the Western tradition. You get these little equations, and they work. You start to find this out when you go on the trail of it. So the person who gets seduced by it does so fairly early in their teens. It looks exotic. It really does. Maybe they like the Indian women. The guys will go for that. They get superficial shit. Think just very superficial. Or they'll see a movie or something.
Pop culture, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes, there's a lot of that. And whether or not it was intentional, whoever makes those rock videos or pop videos or movies somewhat gives you the impression, and there are films like this, there's actually movies that I love very deeply that do this, like the original Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power. Perfect example, now that we're talking about it. Well, of course, the movie's a masterpiece, right? But nevertheless, as a backdrop, it would be a perfect example, and there's others as well. And so the setting of this sort of spiritual aspiration needs to happen in the wilderness of the Himalayas, up in some remote Buddhist temple, and the more remote, the better, and the less populated, the better, and the more stark, the better. And if you climb up even further, you'll finally meet an old wise man with a really long beard sitting under a banyan tree with these glorious eyes. He's just been waiting for you. Yeah, yeah. And he only eats a bowl of rice and he can do all these miraculous things. He's been just waiting. He knew you were coming and he's waiting for you because he wants to now deliver unto you the whole mystery of the universe. Okay? So this type of tripe has affected millions of schmucks in the West. Hell, it already had them over their arses in the East, where people would always send their, sort of quiet, useless sons to the monastery. People had big families there, as you know, in the East. Well, always the son who looked like he couldn't milk a cow, right? Or build a fence or even sit by the river and fish for a single fucking fish. He's useless. Well, we know what we can do with him. It's obligatory to send one of our children, at least one, to the local monastery. And we'll send this half-wit. And hell, they got a vow of silence, so nobody will even know he's a half-wit. And you just got to dress him up in some orange robes, tell him to go run and beg, or you can do you can train him to do some basic manual labor, and he can ring a bell, and he knows how to sleep on a mat and get up exactly 5 times a night when the bell rings, and it's all good. And then I told you before, when they knew the West was looking, they quickly mobilized with the help of people in the West, okay, and also from the East and other countries. They mobilized this and they took a genuine interest and they responded to it in a very crafty way. And the whole thing has just continued from that point on. But then this other part of the equation, the young men who got involved in it in the West and the women generally couldn't give a damn about the so-called Western philosophical tradition or the Western Hermetic tradition. All they knew was that they didn't like the Christianity, and you said it, that they had learned down the local Sunday school or church. So they threw that out. And that's enough. This anarchic. And there was just enough shows back in the 50s and 60s where these sort of Indian guru types would crop up. Very innocuous, nothing to write home about, but they'd be there. It'd be in these famous popular shows. And this worked, especially in the post-war years where people were a little bit jaded. New affluence was coming back, but people were sick and tired of the old pre-war mores. They didn't even like the architecture anymore, and they wanted to see it swept away. I'm thinking here of Britain. They hated it, right? And they wanted to sort of swept anything old. That was all grandma's stuff, grandfather clocks and beautiful gardens. This all had to go. Beautiful parks. What do we want all this for? Let's turn it into a dog toilet. Let's turn it into a racetrack or where the kids can go rollerblading or something. And so all over Europe and all over Britain, this is what happened. Trees were cut down. Parks were transformed. Park is a place where you go to sit quietly in peace in nature. Oh no, that's all over. No one can sit in a park in Britain today in quiet. They were turned into nightmares. And these were Victorian parks that were specifically made for aesthetic appreciation and contemplation. That was out. These moderns that you're talking about, you're in the postmodern, they honed in on that. And it's an art of how they actually destroyed the parks, and not just the parks, but other places too. They were systematically destroyed. And the local women with their push chairs and their kids loved it. They went for it. They got themselves on the boards of local towns and insisted that it happens even more. So any space that was quiet, pensive, natural, with natural, hedgehogs and moths and bees and really little apple trees and all of this quaint stuff was systematically destroyed. And nothing was put in its place. It was just a simple, brutalistic uglification of our towns. And it didn't happen by any hidden hand coming in, at night to do it. The same with the comprehensive schools and all the rest of the things we could mention here. But back to the point. The way to redecorate this post-war world now involved this multiculturalistic attitude. And many people at the top of government had fallen for it, many people in academia had fallen for it, and many of the proles, the normies, also fell for it. And the media picked up on it big time and started to mobilize it. So it's all part of mind control. It's got nothing to do with anything real. And this is a big shocker then, because when people actually travel east on a little holiday and they go there and they think this is going to be the best holiday of my life, no, they don't come back with family albums stuffed of the great time that they had. It's absolutely dreadful, right? And you can read it in biographies of some very, very famous people who made the mistake. The amount of bribery and corruption that's there, the amount of child poverty, the amount of animal brutality, and the whole, it just goes on. It's a fucking frightful nightmare, and you're lucky to come out alive. And this is for the whole of the East. Nothing is maintained. Beautiful things that were built fall into dilapidation within a matter of only years, and they're unfixable. Nobody can fix it. They don't even try. It's just a nightmare. But somehow my peeve is, because I have studied all of this, my peeve is that while this was all going on, you see, a very deep traditions were being neglected. And I knew that at some point in our destiny of the West, this is going to start showing up, this deficit, as it has. Postmodernism, posthumanism is based in deficit, right? In the fact that you don't know what you've got, you don't know where to go to find it, and so you got what you've got. You've got this because you don't know that right over there is this. It's neglect, total neglect. And we need to get back to some of those traditions. So my little articles and programs, try to give these primers to people to introduce them to some of these teachings, But I think these two things in summary, I would say the New Age movement is not going anywhere. It's dangerous. And also is this up and coming non-dualism cult is something to be watching out for. That would be terrible if that took off more. Those two things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll call up the article. Well, we'll get started into it a little bit.
Yeah. Oh,
Very
okay.
good.
Thanks.
Yeah, super. So again, this article can be found on your website, michaeltsarion.com, and is titled Better Dead Than Real. It starts off with an ancient saying: the axe that fells the sandalwood tree is stained by the scent of sandalwood. When we look at a river, we deduce from simple observation that its winding course is due to its two banks. The waters flow between and move in the direction dictated by them. However, we must also acknowledge that the banks are themselves formed by the waters of the river, and without their persistent flow, the banks cannot be what they are. The waters create the banks, and, reciprocally, the banks define the river. Perhaps this is why we enjoy gazing on a river and call it beautiful. It's not a matter of opposites in the accepted sense. Rather, it's more a case of polarities in a state of harmonious tension. It's not the case only with rivers. The Contrarium, as you call it, undergirds and governs all existence, and is the mystery of mysteries. Our definition of opposites is rather mundane, and ultimately fallacious rendering of the Contrarium, the foundation from which all reality emanates.
Yeah. Well, it's a little poetic, but see, when we look at a river and you see these banks, and the left brain says, well, there's your river. The banks, the water's following the river. But some part of us always stops and gazes again and says, but wait a minute, the water created the banks. So which is it? And you can't tell. It's an imponderable. So there is this third element then that comes into play when we, the observer, observes the contrarium. Now, the thing is, you don't really observe the contrarium. That's what this was written about. You get glimpses of it, and that's not good enough. We need to start to become more lucidly aware of this oppositorium, this contrarium. And so my work is trying to help you do that. But it's not to say that people don't actually get glimpses of it. They do. And often the glimpse of it is something that we find very beautiful, like looking at a natural landscape, because the contrarium is waving to us through the natural order. It is the natural order. But we grow up and we're never, ever, ever, ever taught this in school. We would have been, had this German mystical tradition and idealistic tradition been dominant in the West, we would have been, right? But we haven't. And even with all the turning to the East, they saturate your mind with this non-dualism, and that's not cutting it either. In fact, it's the complete opposite of what I'm talking about. So So getting glimpses is good, but our time has come now to become much more cogently aware of what this is. And then that will help us revision lots of things, other things, like science, like quantum science, because I don't know, even computers look at 1, 0, right? The 0, 1, that's a contrarium, right? The wave and the particle, that's a contrarium. So we will be able to revision a lot of things, especially some of the important things when we do so. But if you want to read a bit more, yeah, that's fine.
For ancient Greek philosophers, it manifested in the polarity known as physis and techne, or nature and technology. In other words, there are the raw materials offered by nature, and there's what we make of them to suit the human world. We take the stone, wood, soil, slate, crystals, metal ores, minerals, etc., to construct our world, the Midworld. We exploit animals, insects, water, salts, and even decorate our artificial environments by aesthetically mimicking nature. But the ancient sages noticed a crucial and puzzling difference between physis and techne, or the natural and unnatural. Artificial things, they said, lack telos. This is a word that defines living processes. It is the root of teleology, the process by which a natural thing, like an acorn, develops into an oak tree. Darwinian evolution is an example of telos. The entire planet and everything in it, of a natural kind, has telos. It is all going somewhere, whether we can define it or not. Even a dead flower or branch has telos. So just to pass it back to you, Michael, how does telos play into what the contrarian is as well?
Well, this is, of course, vitally important. Comes out of Aristotle primarily, but it was there before him. Is the difference between being and becoming. That everything, there's a thatness, which is the heart of philosophy. Philosophy comes out of a thatness, not a whatness, and gets subverted into whatness. So that something exists, or that anything does exist, was the wonder, the astonishment, the awe that all of philosophy was based in. And then slowly, by the time of Aristotle, the focus kind of changed from that and started to move into, well, then it said, okay, it's not, the important thing is not that things exist, it's what is it that exists? Let's look up closer to these things. Now, Martin Heidegger thought this was absolutely huge because it was a mistake, right? And it was a thing that was going to lead to technology, which it did. Now you are using the left brain, which you and I have spoken about so much before. So this is where this comes on, and might even be one of the reasons for the strength of the left brain, because the left brain takes charge now into, what is it? Well, it's hard. Okay, what's that? Well, not soft. What's soft? Well, that's not hard. And it's red. What's that? Well, it's kind of not orange. What's orange? Well, you see, and now it starts. My God. It's brittle. It's rough. It's smooth. It's plain. It's light. It's heavy. It's useful. No, it's not useful. It's similar to this other thing, right? And on goes. So philosophy soon became technology, science, and this all happened. And the being, the very fact that anything exists when really nothing should exist, no longer bothered anybody. And as time went by, it bothered less and less and less and less people until Heidegger brought it back in the 20th century. And brought it back with such a bang that it just almost collapsed the towers, right? But back to these two ancient Greek concepts. Physis, or used to be called also phusis in its earlier etymology, which is nature, and techne. And all this meant was phusis is the natural order, and then the techne is what we make of it as human beings. And always, 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 the natural will have within it telos. And everything we make of a natural thing doesn't. Right? So a branch or an acorn or a flower or a bud, anything that nature creates has this sort of teleological cycle, if you want to call it that, or just this simple movement of becoming. Whereas everything we create just lies there dead. We have to use it. Yeah, it'll just decay or be completely useless after its one purpose use. It'll sit there and rot. Yeah. So why are we not taught that in school? Well, so we would have been, right? These are the things we're unpacking of this German-Italian tradition. We would have been. And children would have been made infinitely more sensitive to this right from day one. That no matter what, the natural order takes precedence over you. You do not take precedence over it. So even when you're drawing with bloody crayons, your teacher should be showing you the natural takes precedent. That which you create has no telos and will fade away. And so the greater artist tries to reverence himself to that. He's aware of this. And he wants to try and say, I'd love to have the telos in my work. And so he's inspired to create even greater, knowing all the time that it's not going to happen. But he says, I'm not just going to leave it there. I'm going to make my music and my painting as close to the natural as I can. So that's how you get Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. All right? That's how you get your John Constables and the wonderful artwork of the world, because they are taking that as an inspiration, as a muse, and they don't look at nature as lesser. You asked me a question 2 weeks ago about Descartes. This is the whole thing that Descartes did, but it was already in the works. It was in the blood where this hard divide would take place. Because in that divide of subject and object, well, first of all, the divide is enough. Just the very fact that you did something that caused a division, you could just leave it there. That's bad enough, because that division doesn't exist. That's totally artificial. And there's not one in a million academies and teachers who know this, who bother talking about it. All these materialist scientists you just mentioned, take that as a given, that we have this hard problem. No, the hard problem is not even the hard problem. You only get to that problem by explaining away all the other problems that you don't want to look at, all the things we're talking about. What have you cut away from the table to get to your silly hard problem? You see? But the thing is that they don't mention this fact. And now that they're in the world of AI, isn't going to change anything either. Computation is not thinking. And computation has no telos. So if this was all taught to people, a lot of things would have been changed. But what I am pointing out is, look, the telos, this is another aspect of the contrarium. When we have telos in physics, what do you think that is? It's so primordial, and yet it's another instance, just like time and space, or time and its contents. Those are two opposites. Time is eternal, but the things in time are not eternal. See, this thing is absolutely everywhere. And telos and physics are the same. But what this did was, when Descartes polarized the two worlds, it was not to just simply polarize, it was to raise up the level of mind above the physical, above physics. We just said that, no, you can't do that. Physics will always be higher than telos, higher than techne, which is man's industry. So Descartes smuggled it in that the techne, the man's intelligence and reason, would be always above nature. And of course, everybody went for it. Everybody was waiting for this. They were waiting with their confetti. This was all set up. It's all stage managed. This opened the whole of the materialistic world view. It had been there, but it had not been prominent. It had been, the equal of other. Blake saw it coming and was warning. Warning signs had been sent up by other people, but it hadn't really got traction until this point. In the really big way, there had been some materialistic people before who had great power to instantiate it. Like Sir Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes. It was certainly there. It was there even in the ancient Greek times, by the way. But again, it didn't have the world behind it. It didn't convince, on an institutional level until Descartes came along. And so the other thing that we talked about was that when this polarity was made, it was done with this underthought of making not only the human more important, but also the subject more important than the so-called object. And more important meant that now, because of this whatness idea, the surveilling intellect, the surveilling reason, is now looking not just at objects, but he's looking at objects that are ontologically inferior to the mind that is observing them. And then it's only one step from there to say, then that thing, move it over there. That thing, boy, it needs to be changed. Move it there. Right? In the categorization and classifications and generalizations, you're now moving the world around as just dead commodities, dead resources, standing resources that are not meaningful in themselves. Heidegger always talks about going to a department store, home base, or Office Depot or something like that, and going over to where the hammers all are. And, they got really expensive hammers that might be in a package, single, because they're made out of something, a very hard alloy. But then you've got your 50-cent hammers, or a couple of quid hammer, the generic ones. They all look the same. They're white-handled, cheap wood, ash wood, and a big hunk of metal at the top. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And any one of them you can pick is as good as the next hammer. And you pay your $2.99 or whatever it is, and you walk out. And you never see the hammer. Because it's one of thousands that look the same. Same with screwdrivers or anything else, right? And so there's no identity in it. It's just a dead resource, made to be dead, made to function, but you have no personal relationship with it. It's absolutely indistinct. It's impersonal, but it does, the only value that it has is that it serves your will. You need to bring it home, to help build your house or something. So this is what Descartes was doing. All things become instrumental. The natural world and all of its attributes become instrumental to my will, to the human will to power. See how the Nietzsche comes in at this point? Nietzsche's all for this. He's totally behind it. Go, yeah, that's right. We subdue the world. In fact, Nietzsche was worse than Descartes. He said, subdue other people as well. Hey, don't forget about, make sure you subdue others. Descartes didn't even get to that point yet. He was a Christian. He just believed, no, just suppress animals and the world and you're good. Nietzsche's going, no, throw humans in as well. Just conquer them all. Unfettered, Genghis Khan type philosophy with the will to power behind it. But Descartes the evil is already there. Nietzsche's just taking it into overdrive. What Descartes had already basically, got rolling. And this is where we are today. The same thing happened. When in fact, the Greeks would have not known what you're doing. There's a certain point of our history comes along where the ancient Greeks would have just known, oh my God, you guys are finished. You guys have switched it all around. And it would have been very, very early. People like Heidegger go back and look, it's already happening by the time of Aristotle. Yeah. But most people agree that it's from Descartes that the problems really begin, because this is where this now seems to be endorsed. Everyone goes for it. The age of technology and the age of the machine take over here at this point. Nature is reduced to a standing resource all over the world. Every culture is doing it. Nobody has the reverence anymore. And this is it. But telos is over. And you see, the more and more you live with that type of mentality and you live in the world of the technological, you won't have any telos either. If your whole world is just encased in what Heidegger called machination, from the German power, mach, it's will to power, right? What do you think is going to happen?
So just as you were speaking a little bit about the Greeks, part of the article here, you mentioned the Greeks once more. The term they used for truth was aletheia. It means unforgetting. The river Lethe, as we recall from mythology, was the dark river of sleep and forgetfulness. With the prefix a, the word means the opposite. Specifically, aletheia means remembering, awakening, discovering, revealing, and even unconcealing. Truth, then, is understood as a process of light and shade, revealing and unrevealing, a definition lost to moderns. What are your thoughts on that, of what truth means, and then how does it relate to remembering, and how does that relate to maybe these themes of the unconscious that we've been coming through before in psychology?
It's a parallel to that. It's Heidegger is drawing attention to, well, it's the Contrarium turning up in Heidegger. He didn't use that word, obviously, right? But nevertheless, he's got it. So when you're on the scent of the Contrarium, you can dig into any philosopher at all and find it. You find it in Fichte with his thesis, antithesis synthesis that was picked up by Hegel. You get it in Hegel, you see. So everywhere you go, and then you even get it in somebody like a sort of a postmodernist, like a Heidegger, you get it as well in several areas. And it's this it's this techne and phusis. It's this whatness and thatness. You see, incredible thing. It's the subject versus object. I mean, everywhere you look, it crops up. And here you have it again in the ancient Greek word for truth. The privative a at the beginning of it, like we also in English have it when you put a at the beginning of something like moral, amoral, it means the opposite, right? So, like atheist, right? Atheist, right? So, aletheia just meant remembering, not forgetting. Lethe or lethia means to forget. So, there you have it again. For Heidegger, he's pointing out that for the ancient Greeks, truth was a kind of a weird play of light. Where you have the light, something must be thrown into darkness. It can't happen any other way. There's a concealing, there's this variegation between an oscillation between the seen and the unseen, and they're in relationship with one another. Now, part of our mind, which of course again would be the left brain, only focuses on one half of this dyad. That is when stuff shows up. We go, there you are. But Heidegger's trying to tell you that the ancients were also aware of that which recedes into the darkness in order for that thing to show up. That which has a strange quality. The ancient word for this was the yin modality, so that the yang can stand forth. But you can't have it always that way. Sometimes the yin has to operate. If you climb up a hill, well, what are you going to do? Stay there for the rest of your life? No, you have to come down the hill. If I have my eyes open, there's times when I have to close them, don't I? It's called blinking. So the yin yang are working together all the time. You can't have one without the other. So this occlusion is very, very important to the ancient Greeks. None of us bother with it because being left brain, all we want to do is when the jack-in-box pops up and there you are. And all our science, everything's based on this. In fact, the whole of materialism is based on this because it doesn't care about what falls back into darkness and conceals itself. Because if that turns out to be the dynamic, then something must have ordained things to be that way. Why is it that way and not some other way? You see? So these are the things they explain away. Now, just because you can't explain it, that means it's an imponderable. But then let it be an imponderable. Don't try to tell me that it doesn't exist. Don't try to tell me that we shouldn't think about it. You see, which has happened. And then when you start to look at life like this, lots of very big things happen. And in my book on existentialism that people can read on Substack, this thing that we're talking about now, is thoroughly gone into. We're not going to do that here. We're just looking at it as another instance of a contrarium. There's many. And in just a couple of paragraphs, I wanted to compress how many there were. The whole of philosophy is based in this contrarium between thatness and whatness. And so Heidegger, in a nutshell, he is taking you back to this idea of the problem of being. Why is there something rather than nothing? He's pulling you out of the whatness, which absorbed the Western intelligence, from day one, and takes you back to the sort of pre-Socratic era where the astonishment that there is anything at all dominates and becomes again the foundation point for philosophy. Very, very, very important. And I think that was a very important stage because he was able to then show clearly that some of these Cartesian things that had happened, how baseless they were and how ultimately destructive they were. This hard polarization. And this was something that had never been pointed out before in philosophy, really. Not to that degree.
I'll ask you a little bit more just about the next section of your article. It comes across, I think it's Friedrich Schelling here, and he says about selfhood and subjecthood, and I'm sort of curious the difference of the two. I'll ask you, I'll read a little bit off the paragraph first and then I'll pass it back to you about what delineates these two things.
Okay.
For Schelling, consciousness itself arose due to dialectical monism. That is the contrarium. Although its movement involves two polarities, these actually move at the behest of a third principle. What we call duality is, therefore, better understood as triality. Of course, that third principle is Geist, Logos, or Spirit. Let's see, I'll even just pass it back to you from there, Michael, with it. How does the third principle really, does it direct it? Is it what telos is? Is it what sort of makes this underlying movement initially? Can you explain it into a little more detail for people of how we get this triality?
Well, that's right. There's a couple of ways of looking at that. One is that if there is this dualism, then you might as well say, hey, then there could be more than a dualism. And the next thing you could think of is a triality. And often that is shown in different ancient schools. Let's think of the Celtic three spirals, and all of that. And then anyway, there is a triality because we are the observers of the Contrarium. So even if you don't believe in a spiritual aspect, we are the spiritual aspect because we are its observer. So the triality turns up whether you like it or not in the fact that your consciousness, you're working out of it. You see, you are the observer of this thing. Now, you are yourself, of course, made up of the Contrarium. So in a way that really kind of doesn't work either, but it's like the banks of the river. Is the river the banks, or is it the water? Or is it both? Or is it neither? See, so at this point, there are imponderables. But yes, the Germans had worked this out and said, well, look, basically it shows you that there's a ground of the dialectic. The dialectic, the dualism, is one thing expressing itself in two polarities, is the sort of shorthand way of looking at it. This then makes it metaphysical and it makes it transcendent. So they believed in spirit. They believed in a transcendent force. And they were not atheists at all. There are some people who tried to make a case that Hegel was really a closet atheist. But yeah, it's an interesting story, but I don't think it's really relevant.
Fair
I don't
enough.
think it really adds up at the end of the day.
And so we've got this then Western philosophical thought of dualism, or maybe in this triality then also. And then that's contrasted to this thread of non-dualism from the East that you see coming in with this New Age movement and the likes. What is dangerous about falling into the non-dualism? Is it more of a spirit of this Thanatos instinct, this death instinct, compared to this more life and progress that you get with the dialectical monism that we've been discussing?
Yes, you see, that's very good because that's really what it is. You and I have talked about the human being's penchant to hate freedom and want to regress back to the semiotic stages. Non-dualism is that on a cultural level. It's exactly this Eastern thing, crept back in again, where they want to destroy the I or the self. And this is where they make their case. And it's absolutely facile. They think they can get away with it because, of course, one of the troubles of the West is that they haven't studied their Freuds and Jungs. They hate Freud. So they don't know anything about regression in the West. And they certainly know nothing about it in the East because Freud was from the West. And so was Jung. And Jung was very, very skeptical about the East. So that when you talk about the East, you've got to look at it as an anti-psychological place par excellence. It is the West that created psychology and psychoanalysis, not the East. They're stuck in something, pre-medieval. And so their definition of ego, you see, is way retarded. So do you see what happens when a Western person goes over there and starts learning that rhetoric? He's, like I said, he's bypassing a huge tradition. Then he comes back into the West and starts speaking. And it's a complete loggerheads with the whole Western tradition. But sadly, because he's talking to a lot of other people who are equally ignorant and don't even know basic pop psychology, they get a hearing. Oh, where'd you get that? Yeah, I'm signing on for that. Non-dualism. And if they knew their Irish Newmans and they knew Otto Rank, and they knew Freud and Jung, and they knew the psychologists, even the 101 stuff about regression, they'd be on guard, but they're not. So as I said, because of all of this Eastern influx, the level of IQ, right, the level of knowledge about the Western tradition, and that includes the bloody psychology, not just the philosophy, has gone down to such a low level. Less than 100 years ago, they taught Latin and Greek in college.
Night and
Look at
day
it now. You barely get taught Ebonics.
I think the average reading age is something like 9 years old, and that's the average. So half the population is worse than that. That's something to ponder for a little bit, like, isn't it?
See,
But yeah,
we've
just
gone downhill
yeah,
in every way.
yeah.
So this is how this whole mess, you're
Mm,
taking the lowest sludged philosophies of the East for high principles here
mm,
because you've sold out the West. You've bankrupted it.
mm.
It's amazing.
And I guess just to sort of tie it up for people, part of what I'm going towards the East and these Eastern philosophies, it's and this attraction of non-dualism. It's just another form of escaping the self. It's another way of, again, listening to the crowd in the head, listening to the superego, maybe the dictates, or actually a way of trying to escape it because it's causing all this internal suffering of this inner tension of where we're so inundated and separated from nature due to the modern world, due to this like overemphasis of technologies we were discussing. And there's a drowning out of the voice of the conscience. But before it drowns out, it's sort of screaming at people. And this is where part of the issue is. And they go, right, let's go sit and learn how to do these different techniques in order to silence it. And this is really the threat. It's this threat of non-dualism, of escaping, of killing the self.
Yes, especially when we looked at those 4 neurotic types, I would say the schizoid would go for this. Others maybe as well, but the schizoid will love it on sight. That's my theory, that the schizoid will love this because they've shut down empathy for the world and for other people because they believed, right, that when they were empathic as young children, they got hurt. They've made the simplest equation, the simplest formula for them. And that is, when I reached out for other people, I suffered pain. If I don't reach out to other people, I won't be hurt. That's the simple formula of the schizoid. And they're quite prevalent in our world today. And so they've already embodied a pathological idea that selfhood equals pain. Not joy, not relationship, not empathy, not passion. No, there's none of that. It's just that selfhood is something that, I'd rather be divested of, because wherever I find it, then I suffer. And that's the contract they've made with themselves. And they're incurable. Now, somebody would argue and say, no, you called them neurotic. As long as somebody's neurotic, they are curable, because the neurotic is somebody who knows at some level that there's something wrong with them. Okay, I agree. When you get to being psychotic, then it's over. So, okay, we can split hairs. But I would say that even of the neurotics, the schizoid is very, very far gone. So he would love this. But say even a depressive who's been depressive for quite a long time, he's okay financially because the government is taking care of him, but he really has no life and he just sits about mulling, flicking through the channels. He's another one who could easily become susceptible to the non-dualism principle. So I think other neurotic types could go for it easily. Not the hysteric, not maybe the manic, not the obsessive, but the other two could easily become quite addicted to it. Yeah.
Well, one of the bad words, I guess, in modern society is being selfish. If I
Yeah.
accuse you of being selfish, you're a bad person. Whereas this contrasts so much to what we were talking about of becoming the self. The self is sort of, almost a goal to move towards. It's actually the goal of telos at the end of the day, I guess. It's becoming more of the self. You would
That's
never
right.
tell an acorn you should become an oak tree, but you could tell a person, don't be selfish. This is sort of part of it, isn't it? Yeah.
It's brilliant that you
Yeah.
pointed this out because, there are some people now within Western idealism who have become so contaminated with the East that that's exactly what they're saying that tradition is about. They're lying and telling you that the goal of certain idealism was selflessness. Oh, yes. All of existentialism is in the hands of the woke, and a great deal of idealism is in the hands of the woke, sadly. So things have got really bad. There's been much more worse than we've even said, not only with non-dualism, but even with this postmodernism. The progressives have taken over. They've been given the dominant seats in the universities, and they have their playbook as well. And so a lot of what I do tries to fight against that. And hopefully, in other shows we'll even get more time to dig into that. But you're quite right. It's poisoned. So now if you turn on a podcast and try to learn about idealism, you might not hear the right thing. So I try to warn people that as soon as they start talking about the Eastern traditions, when it's a program on Western idealism, be very, very cautious immediately, because there are certain scholars of a very high level that are trying to subvert it from within and pretend that Hegel, Schelling, and others were actually talking about complete annihilation of the self. So watch out.
That's mad. Well, that's a big trap to fall into there for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
As we're on this theme of selfishness, two psychologists, or I guess one psychologist and one philosopher we haven't really spoke about yet, is Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden. What are their thoughts on selfishness? Why is selfishness a good thing in their eyes?
Well, this is huge, of course. They were rationalists, so they go back to the supremacy of reason. But they are interested in a reason that is very strongly articulated to the natural world, to reality. So there's nothing wrong with that. So they say that nature, remember we said that nature has the telos? In many ways, that's what they're telling you. And they're saying that you definitely should be a creator. But your creation should be based on meticulously studying the natural order. It's your way, sure, it's your teacher. So they believed in things like man as a hero. They definitely believed that man is an artist. So for them, man's techne was meant to be more of artistic creations, even though those things can be engineering and mechanical as well. He is, though, in his essence, a conceptual being, and when they said that, they meant that he's really an artist. Man is really an artist. And he wants to mimic the natural force of physics. And he is. They're quite right. So their philosophies are deeply rooted in common sense, and that Ayn Rand was particularly worried about the East and its infusion, as I am, right? I learned it from her, partly to be very wary. I mostly learned it from my own experiences, but when I picked up her books, I loved it. Absolutely loved it, because I could see she was mostly worried about communism, but she also added that a similar pestilence enters in when you bring in this Oriental Eastern thought. That's why so many of these countries like China and others are still communistic. There's a reason. She knows the connection, right? And also very deeply collectivist, because she was the anti-collectivist, as I am as well. So I find her works very, very, insightful. But she warned of two forces that she poetically described, summarizing it as Attila the Hun and the witch doctor. And this meant, of course, the demagogue or autocrat who will always wield a big hammer, a big club to rule over you. And she says the West has plenty of them, with the communists being the worst. But then you have this witch doctor who often can take over, and he controls you on the emotional level. So these would be the priests. And I agree with her that nothing more dangerous than the priests have ever existed on this planet from time immemorial, going back almost 10,000 years from today. And so when I, make these snipes about the West, when I make these snipes about the East, I am really thinking about these priesthoods. They're institutions, and they're not good. They weren't good in the West. You know, I've talked about the Essenes and other groups, right, like that, the fourth sect and what have you, right? And then even the fifth sect, they're another bunch of priests fighting each other. So our world has been priest haunted. Look at Ireland. From generations on. Yeah. And they're not gone. They've just morphed. Basically, what they believe is still in power. That's why it can raise its ugly head again anytime there's enough rug pulling. And the Islam thing is nothing but a black priesthood as well. Black robes back again, and another guy's. So they have done an enormous amount of damage. I get into it in other shows, but we've got to watch out for these religious priests. And she calls them the witch doctor, the rule of the witch doctor. Because you may be a person who can be emotionally manipulated, by these types, and they can confuse your brain. Like we said in another program, they tell you man was made before woman. You believe it, right? See, so they can twist your mind in any which way. Yeah. And the scientist, well, that's another, they can be unheroic. They can be collectivist. They can use man as means to ends, whereas Ayn Rand said, no, you are an end in yourself. Man is an end in himself. But man is always going to be susceptible to control from these two powers if he is not himself heroic. So instead of using the word psychology, Nathaniel Branden didn't mind. He wasn't as strict as her, and he was a psychologist, her protege. But she preferred the term psychoepistemology. That's kind of an ugly word, but it means the same thing as psychology, with this difference. The man who has a psychoepistemology, he not only knows things, but he's very aware of himself as knower. This is important. And he's following on from this old change that happened during the time of Immanuel Kant, where the whole focus did turn onto who am I, the knower, right? The second Copernican revolution, where instead of asking metaphysical type questions, you started to question more about who is this person who questions these things? What do I know about him? This led to psychoanalysis and many, many other paradigms, right? Well, Ayn Rand is in her own way picking up on that. And she's saying, yeah, who are you? But much, much more than asking silly questions about yourself, that's all necessary. Do you have a basic value of yourself as this questioner? So psychoepistemology is not just a process of asking philosophical questions. It's the inherent underlying value that I am at the head of the food chain, and I am human, and I have my reason. Now, that makes her a philosopher in all caps, because the word philosophy means lover of wisdom. Well, she's one of the only people that really deserves that title, because she was saying, do you love the fact that you are a knower and that you are the rational animal? If you don't, then there's a huge chunk missing. You've got to value the fact of who you are. This is, in shorthand, called self-esteem. This is how she makes her case for self-esteem. It's not some pop psychology thing you'll find in a self-help book. This was a human philosophy, and she makes no bones about it. And then now, when you know this, you can now see why she would have a peeve with the East or with the collectivists, because they don't have any of this. They value nothing but the crowd. They value nothing but the hysterics. They value nothing but the one leash for all the necks. And they make no bones about it. Sure, the very core philosophy of the East, of the witch doctor, is there is no self. The Buddha taught there's no such thing as a self. There's no Atman at all. That's an illusion. Or the Eastern teachings talk about Maya, that the world is just an illusion. There's no reality to it. If you want to understand Ayn Rand, then you just got to know that she is the complete opposite to that. The real is the real. And then, of course, we could go from there. But that's basically what it is. And the self is not just a self, it's a self that has the value of being a self. Not just having a reason, but esteeming the fact that we have reason, valuing it above all things. And then this would be ethical as well. This immediately has ethics involved in it. Because if you have that value, you will not submit yourself to the will of another person. You see? So many other things immediately fall into place once you have this original self-esteem. Then lots of other things go right. You can't be a collectivist. You won't be a communist. You'll be an ardent capitalist. You will be a moral being, and you'll treat other human beings like you do treat yourself. You see, so many, many things automatically come right when you just have this one premise. Her works are absolutely magnificent. I highly recommend them.
Yeah, people should definitely read Atlas Shrugged or Fight and Head. They're both phenomenal books, and they really sort of encapsulate exactly what we've been talking about so far. And Who is John Galt? Like, who's that when you look around the modern world, there's no worse name about it, is there really?
Yeah. Well, that's
Um,
been bred out. The Americans have fallen for communism and socialism long, long ago, and there's nothing left. They
Look what
got it
happened in New York.
completely
Yeah,
gutted. Yeah. And she
yeah,
has
yeah.
thinner books, that are based on
Mm,
philosophy, like Philosophy Who Needs It and the
mm,
New Intellectual. All these ones I recommend highly. And there's the Ayn Rand Institute YouTube channel. Very well watching those programs. They're still going strong.
very good. Yeah. And I guess I'll ask you one last little question, Michael, and we'll maybe wrap up from there. I'm thinking initially we had spoke about this religion is going to be coming after, I guess, people get tired of Christianity again after its maybe short revival that's occurring that's going on now. And I think looking across the political spectrum of what's occurring in the West is this rise of the right wing, or the far right, as they're so called. And I look back then in history, like what was the religion of the far right previously? And I see a sort of maybe tie to paganism, I think of the Nazis and that kind of thing. Can you see a return of paganism happening again in the modern world, or as being one of these answers rather than non-dualism? Or how does that sort of all play in together? Do you see any other alternatives?
Yeah, it could do. It could do in a
Mm,
certain way. And there are certain interesting traditions out there, like Asa Tru, Asatru. I recommend people looking into that. Asa Tru movement. And here and there, you get these little subcultures. What that boils down to, I'm for it because it is all about the West. These are, Norse traditions, Celtic and pre-Celtic traditions. And so we need it because always, 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 when you go outside the West, do you not see how every other race and every other tradition is exalted because they themselves, think of the Native American Indian community or the Asian community, right? Everybody lauds the fact that they stick together, that they know their traditions, and that they are deeply into their ancestors. And Japanese culture as well, which I love and think is great. They're into their ancestor culture. So why is it that it's okay for everybody else on the planet, but not okay for Western people to be into their pagan traditions? So on a personal level, I think it was absolutely fantastic if European people delve deeply, whoever they are, into the pre-Christian roots. And I've written 2 volumes on the Irish origins of civilization to do my bit for that, for the Irish race. And I certainly support that. Yeah.
that's good. I think maybe in the next episode we'll come back to like maybe what the positives are, and I'm thinking of things like of better alternatives, maybe a return to like Hermeticism and understanding of it, maybe a new sort of form of shadow work and these kind of things that we've been discussing so far, because it might turn out over the next century that these start to crystallize into sort of practices that people can actually look into and to learn more about. But maybe that's me being hopeful. Um, have any little final thoughts about that, Michael, or anything you want to cover over before we end another show? Or maybe
Well,
save that for next time.
yeah, I agree with you to that degree that there's always these paths that are there that have been ignored, that are there for the sincere individual. I'm not thinking of mass movements, though. I'm thinking of individuals who are conscientious enough to realize that just because this stuff, isn't working for me anymore, they should have the hope to realize through my work and other things that there are other traditions that they can get involved in and that are very deep and very rich. That's all you can do. Yeah. I've been at it long enough to know that it's never going to be a mass movement. And I'm not even interested in mass movements, in that sense, because even if it does start up, it'll usually deteriorate and some charlatans will gain control and be leading it, profiteering from it or leading it down a wrong path very, very quickly, catering to the lowest common denominator. But see, because we have these great teachers of the past, I always call the past history synonymous with truth. There's never a problem that we could ever face in the modern world, and we haven't, that hasn't already got its solutions. Just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that that's any less true. See, the world doesn't know all the thinkers and the teachers we've had because it's thrown them aside. So there's no reason for pessimism in that degree because we have all the answers already in the works of great people. But for every ponce that teaches in a college or a school, they're taking up space. While you have those people at the helm of the colleges and the schools, this is the big burden. Most of them are communistic. Most of them are collectivistic. Most of them are multiculturalists. These are some of the foulest people, right? They're in the education system. And the fact that we've allowed our kids to be turned over to these people is astonishing to me, right? That the standards were so low. So that now implicates parents, you see? So one thing leads to the other. They're just as bad. Yeah. Yeah. But that doesn't reflect on the fact that there's, amazing wisdom out there from great writers. We know this. Even in the popular culture with people like, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and all sorts of people like that. I mean, it's obvious, even in the realm of fiction, let alone anything else. In movie making, it's amazing. Like I've just mentioned this Razor's Edge movie. You see, you just watch that and other films like it. You're going to tell me that it wasn't all explained to you? The Moon and Sixpence, another films I always refer to in my work. Yeah, it's all there. It's just a tradition that we need to spend the time. And in my works, orient you to that, because I mention these works and the little articles that I do to make it easy, because I know this all been scattered. A lot of it's lost, and it would take a lot of time if you didn't have it. Some directions, because also you might get waylaid. There's a lot of teachers also out there that you want to kind of avoid, that you shouldn't be reading, because they're, they may look attractive on the surface, but they're not really worth it when you really get down into it. And you have to plow through all the lies as well. This is sadly the case. And these are often people's champions who are bankrolled, thrown up, somebody like a Russell Brand, right? And there's many, many others. And these are basically charlatans. But the war is on. Look at the influx of Islam. And so when you get involved in your pre-Christian roots and your pagan origins, it's a very good thing, because this might help then people realize that there is a culture worth fighting for, and you're not just going to sit back and be overrun by some, medieval religion that's arrested back in the 7th century.
Mm.
And that was even considered primitive back then, let alone now.
Fair.
No.
And even just a quick synopsis of what paganism is. It's mainly nature worship, or this is that how you see it? You see it as nature as having a spirit, and it's a connection with that. Is that essentially how you're seeing it, or how would you describe paganism to it?
No, I would see it completely like that, like nature worship.
Yeah.
And it can involve many, many things. But there's also a campaign to keep us locked up in these ugly cities, which are obscenities, really, when you look at it, from an artistic point of view. As I said, there's been a lot of physical damage done to nature, and they want people removed from the growing things, from the open spaces, from rivers, from mountains, and they just want it reduced to recreation, so that the only time you're ever in nature, you're doing something stupid, like sports or whatever, right? It's all nonsense, right? So, yeah, it would be great if people could get back to a much more wholesome connection to nature, and also make sure that their children. See, the whole idea of good parenting is to ultimately make your children self-sufficient. You're a good parent when you're doing that. When they can live off the land, when they're good with animals, when they're good with their hand, and they're not just pushing buttons all day on a device. Yeah, if you want to judge good parenting, then how are your children becoming self-sufficient as much as possible? Even if it's only 25% or 50%, whatever it might be. Building things, making things, and having the confidence, and not being just mall rats. 100% dependent on all the garbage, of the simulation world, the simulacra.
And it perfectly ties in of what we've been discussing so far. I guess staying in the city, it heightens this voice of the crowd, whereas heading back out into nature, it helps that's where you reflect the self into nature, and this is where the voice of the conscious can go up. It's, what's the old saying, in silence is where God speaks. And I guess just getting back in towards that more.
Yes, it is. And also, when we talked earlier about the roots of philosophy being that something exists, you're never going to ever really get to that questioning point when you're stuck in the city with all of its domestic and social minutiae. But once you go to nature, that wonder will return. Not what things are, that's part of it, but that something is. Because actually, nothing around you should be here. There's such a higher likelihood of nothingness existing that something should be. Science is not rooted in that. Science is entirely rooted in the whatness of things. That's what's its raison d'etre, and that's when it succeeds. So it's got its place. But real philosophy, as Heidegger showed, needs its place back again. But Heidegger was clever enough to say that, look, at the end of the day, philosophy has nothing more to teach us. We need to go back to arts and crafts. We need to go back to music, you see, and to poetry. And to that degree, he was right. What he meant, he was right. Go back to working with your hands, going back to be self-sufficient, learn how to build a house,
Mm.
Things like that. And that will bring community together as well in a proper, wholesome way.
Thank you very much again, Michael, for coming in and have this chat once more. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for stopping by to watch. This will probably be coming out near Christmas time. So Merry Christmas to everybody as well. And I guess we'll catch everyone else in the new year when we'll have plenty to work upon and to build from there. Any final last little words, Michael, leave people with? Or
No, just
up
a
to
big
yourself?
thanks for covering these articles. And I look forward to doing it some more in the future. Thank you very much, Matty.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you again. See you next time, guys.